What's happening, y'all? Welcome inside the Fantasy Stock Exchange. Bush coming at you solo today to talk about some training camp risers and fallers. What we're going to be doing basically is going through Underdog ADP over the last 2 weeks or so since training camp has been open. And we're going to be looking at some of the guys that have lost ADP, some of the guys that have gained ADP. So that way, you know, when you're doing mock drafts or if you have your actual drafts coming up, where players are going relative to where they were going a couple weeks ago. So since training camps have opened, obviously we've had some things change. Certain players look good. Certain players have gotten injured. So we're going to basically go through and recap all the news of the last 2 weeks, and I'll give my thoughts based on my rankings and certain things of that nature. If you guys enjoy this video at any point, if I provided you with some value, please go ahead and like the video, comment any of your thoughts down below, and subscribe to the channel if you are new. We are hoping to get to 5,000 subscribers as soon as possible. So we appreciate if you are new to the channel and you want to win a fantasy championship with us this year, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. We're going to hit the intro and then we're going to get right into this. So we're going to start with the QB risers, and you guys can see them on the screen right now. We have the typical names that you'd expect to see: Deshaun Watson on the rise, Aaron Rodgers on the rise, Taysom Hill on the rise, and Ben Roethlisberger on the rise. So obviously with Deshaun Watson, it's the fact that he's actually at training camp is the reason he's on the rise right now, because none of us thought he'd get to this point with the Houston Texans. We figured he'd be dealing with his legal situation all offseason, then we never hear from the guy all season until some suspension or something like that comes down. So I guess that's the reason he's on the rise. I still wouldn't spend a draft pick on the guy, though. If you are considering spending draft picks on him in underdog drafts, I would just stay away from him. Aaron Rodgers obviously is the big one. He returned to camp. He's going to play for the Packers. He went from a guy that was going, in the 100th pick overall, and now he's inside the top 8 quarterbacks. A solid guy that you want to grab, obviously, as a top end quarterback. And then Taysom Hill. To begin Saints training camp, Taysom Hill was actually the starter, right? He was the guy who took the first team reps on the first day of training camp, and that continued again for the second day. So it looks like Taysom Hill is the favorite to start for New Orleans. Obviously, Jameis Winston has also gotten some work with the starters as well. So this is a full-fledged QB competition. I expect Jameis Winston to win this competition, but it almost seems like Taysom Hill has a bit of an edge because he's been there a bit longer. Sean Payton knows him a little bit more. And then on top of that, we also have Michael Thomas getting injured. So a lot of people have pointed to the narrative that Taysom Hill should be the starter now that Michael Thomas is out, because he provides the offense with more explosive plays, because, without Michael Thomas, Jameis Winston's going to be limited in terms of weapons. But I mean, I think that's just kind of a narrative thing. I think the best quarterback's going to win regardless. And even if Jameis Winston's the starter, that means you can use Taysom Hill at tight end or whatever position that they use him at. So Ben Roethlisberger also on the rise. I'm not really sure what that means. I'm assuming it's just because Ben Roethlisberger is a guy that is reported to camp, and we've heard some reports about him looking younger or whatever. So he's on the rise. He's got some good weapons around him. He's a good guy to target as your QB3 in best ball drafts, but that's about it. That's all I give credence to in terms of Ben Roethlisberger. So to the QB fallers, we have the obvious names here. Carson Wentz dealing with a 5 to 12 week foot injury. He had surgery, I believe, 2 days ago on the injury. Frank Reich was on the Pat McAfee show yesterday, and he talked about Carson Wentz had a pretty standard procedure. They went in and they pulled out a bone from his foot, and, he should be back on that timeline. The 5 to 12 week timeline is a really, it's a big window of time, but it should be, ready to go at least by the start of the season. I think whether or not the Colts make any moves, whether they go trade for, a quarterback or they call up Phillip Rivers to come out of retirement or whatever, I think that's going to signal whether or not Carson Wentz is going to be ready for the start of the season, because I'm not sure they really need to go out and sign somebody. If they need to play Jacob Eason for a game or two in the regular season, I don't think that's the worst thing in the world. So we'll just have to see how that situation plays out. I gave my thoughts yesterday on a YouTube short about Jonathan Taylor regarding him and the Carson Wentz and Quentin Nelson injuries. So go check that out if you haven't already seen it. But Jameis Winston, as a result of Taysom Hill being on the rise, is obviously on the fall, because it looks like he's losing this quarterback competition, whether it's rigged in Taysom Hill's favor or not. It looks like Taysom Hill is the front runner to start for this team. So that obviously means that Jameis Winston is on the fall. Jalen Hurts also on the fall. I'm not really sure if this has anything to do with Devontae Smith's MCL sprain that he sustained. I have a feeling it just has something to do with the fact that people probably realized that Jalen Hurts was going a little bit too high to begin with, because we had Jalen Hurts going over, and I think he's a fine fantasy quarterback. He's going to offer a lot as a rusher, but a lot of people were putting him ahead of guys like Tom Brady and ahead of guys like Ryan Tannehill and ahead of guys like Matthew Stafford, who we know what they've done in this league, that we know that they can be top 10 fantasy quarterbacks. And we were kind of just putting the cart before the horse on Jalen Hurts. So he's a guy that I would comfortably take after those guys, but I still think he is a good, he's a good QB1 to have. And people were kind of hyping him up at the time as a great late round quarterback. But the problem was he wasn't actually a late round quarterback. He was going inside the top 8 overall quarterbacks, which at that point, you're still getting a ceiling, obviously, because of that rushing ability, but he definitely is a lot more riskier of a pick at that kind of ADP level. So speaking of Ryan Tannehill, he's on the fall. Honestly, not sure why. Maybe it's because Julio Jones is dealing with some kind of legal situation. But in my opinion, Ryan Tannehill is the single biggest target of mine in drafts, because Ryan Tannehill, of all the quarterbacks that I really like their outlook this year, Ryan Tannehill is my quarterback 7 or my quarterback 8, I believe, in my rankings. And this is a guy that legitimately finishes a top 10 quarterback last year. And as I talked about in the quarterback, what makes a league winning quarterback video, I talked about how Ryan Tannehill would have legitimately been the quarterback 1 in 2017 and 2013. It was just a big, big year for quarterbacks last year. So people are going to look at his finish and be like, oh, okay, well, he was only the QB9, QB10. What kind of ceiling can we expect out of him when we're dealing with guys like Jalen Hurts who have a rushing ceiling? It's like Ryan Tannehill has the best receiving cast that he's ever had. This is a guy that legitimately could finish as a top 5 quarterback, and no one seems to care. He seems like a guy that is consistently kind of brushed off as a back-end QB1. I think he has a high ceiling. I think he has a high floor as well. So he's a guy that I'm always grabbing in the 9th, 10th round of underdog drafts, because I think he's criminally undervalued. And Matthew Stafford, same thing, honestly. Same exact thing I just said for Ryan Tannehill. Great weapons around him. Talked about him as a bounce-back candidate yesterday. He's a guy that obviously has good protection. He's never had coaching like this in his career. Cam Akers now dealing with the Achilles injury. I think he's a guy that's ready to explode. I think he's going to be the leading charge and the leading force of this offense. And this is going to be one of the more pass-happy units in the league, because I'm pretty sure a lot of people expect them to be run-heavy, especially when Cam Akers was healthy. But now that it's the Matthew Stafford show there and their starting running back is injured, I have a feeling this is going to be a very pass-heavy operation. So let's move on to the running backs, and usually the position that people care most about. Obviously, as a result of the Cam Akers Achilles injury, which happened at the beginning of training camp, we have 2 Rams running backs on the rise, Darrell Henderson and Xavier Jones. Obviously, when you look at Darrell Henderson, 58.5 is where his ADP has settled over the last 2 weeks since the Cam Akers injury. So 58.5, if you guys aren't aware of that, that's the late 4th round of ADP. It's almost a 5th round pick. So we're looking at Darrell Henderson basically in the same light relative to ADP as guys like Josh Jacobs and guys like Miles Sanders. A little bit worse than a guy like David Montgomery or Chris Carson in terms of ADP. So that's basically where Darrell Henderson has settled in terms of the expert view on what his value is going to be this year. We all know that the Rams offense and the Rams situation is going to be a good one, right? I talked it up for Cam Akers all offseason that the offensive line was good. They run the ball in the red zone all the time. But the thing that separates Darrell Henderson from Cam Akers, we can't just immediately slot Darrell Henderson into everything that Cam Akers was going to get, is that we've heard the C word, the committee word, right? We've heard it a couple days ago, and I'll show it on the screen right now. But apparently the Rams are looking to deploy more of a committee approach. And to me, that makes sense, right? You lose your star running back in Cam Akers. You aren't just going to immediately thrust the backup running back into a full workload. It usually doesn't work out that way for most teams. And Darrell Henderson's a fine running back, but I don't think he's capable of shouldering a huge workload. So the fact that they're going to use Xavier Jones and whoever else is there, maybe they sign another player, then that makes a lot of sense to me, because I think this is this team is going to run through their passing game, and Darrell Henderson will be a complement to that. He won't be the engine of the offense like Cam Akers might have been if he had stayed healthy. And looking at a couple of the other risers on this list, you can see that Rashad Penny is up a significant amount of spots. He's up 24 spots in ADP. And to me, the reason for that is the fact that he's actually healthy. And apparently he's down some weight as well as he recoups from his ACL tear. And when you look at this backfield, you look at Chris Carson, you look at Rashad Penny, to me, I'll take the cheaper option. And I know that's a lazy cop-out answer, and everybody seems to say that about every backfield. But for the Seahawks backfield, it makes a lot of sense to me, because both players are injury prone, right? We've seen Rashad Penny deal with ACL tears and a number of other injuries. We've seen Chris Carson deal with a lot of nagging lower body stuff. And both of these guys are set to see some kind of workload. I expect Rashad Penny to fit into what Carlos Hyde was doing last year. Chris Carson, obviously, to be the starter when he's on the field. But should anything happen to Chris Carson, I expect Rashad Penny to at least get Chris Carson's role, and then maybe they bump up DJ Dallas into the second tier running back role. So Rashad Penny is a guy that I like grabbing at the end of drafts, at the end of best ball drafts specifically, because I think there's a pretty easy path to see that Chris Carson misses a couple games here and there because, I mean, he's never really played a full season, and Rashad Penny is apparently shedded some weight, and I'll put this on the screen right now. There was a report from Seahawks camp that he's looking good and he's shed some weight. I guess he was playing around 230 so far in his career, and he's down about 7-8 pounds. So he's looking a bit leaner from that perspective. So I'm not really sure what that means, but I'm basically just reporting the fact that Rashad Penny is healthy. He is in camp and he is a threat to Chris Carson's workload. How much of a threat is he? Probably not that much, but I think he's a good backup running back to invest in late in drafts. Obviously, once week 1 comes, we'll probably know exactly what his role is. You can just drop him then. He's a good guy to stash for the preseason in case anything happens to Carson. So A.J. Dillon and Aaron Jones, obviously big beneficiaries of the fact that Aaron Rodgers is going to play this year. He's going to play for the Packers, and A.J. Dillon is up 12 spots in ADP. He's going from a guy that was a hopeful running back to now that Jamal Williams is gone, it's just him and Aaron Jones. This is probably a guy that is going to have some standalone value. Now, I say we say that a lot with backup running backs. Oh, they're a handcuff with standalone value. But in A.J. Dillon's case, I actually do think it's true because we're looking at a Packers offense that was among the league low in pass attempts. They were not a team that was passing the ball a lot. Obviously, they were very effective when they did pass the ball. They had the MVP quarterback in Aaron Rodgers, but this was a run-heavy team. And I think there's room for A.J. Dillon to have 150 carries this year. And Aaron Jones is probably not a guy that's going to carry the ball 250, 300 times. He's never been that guy. He's probably a 200 to 215 carry running back, and he's going to make his hay in the passing game, obviously. So A.J. Dillon, again, a guy that has standalone value, but is a tremendous handcuff if anything happened to Aaron Jones. So he's another guy that I like taking in the 9th, 10th round of leagues because I think he's a good backup running back to roster. We see some camp fallout from some injury reports. Obviously, Devontae Booker is on the rise because Saquon Barkley has been a little bit ambiguous with his situation. Devontae Booker, we assume, is the direct backup in New York, although they did just sign somebody off the top of my head. I can't think of who it is, but they did just sign somebody to go along with Devontae Booker. And Saquon Barkley obviously is dealing with a post ACL tear kind of recovery. We're not really sure what his status is going to be week 1. I highly doubt he plays any preseason games or anything of that nature, but this remains one of the more ambiguous situations in fantasy because this is a premier fantasy asset that we're dealing with and a guy that would be probably the 3rd overall pick in fantasy drafts if we knew he was healthy right now. So this is a big deal, this Saquon Barkley situation. We're going to have to continue to follow this week by week, day by day, practice report by practice report, because this Saquon situation is going to make or break fantasy seasons, in my opinion. If Saquon works out and he's fine this season and he's the same old Saquon Barkley, he's going to win people leagues because you're going to get him at a discount. But if he's not okay and he, goes 10th overall or 9th overall in fantasy drafts and he completely bums out, he's on the PUP list to start the season, doesn't quite get his legs under him, and it's just a completely lost season coming off the ACL tear, then that's also possible as well. And that's going to cost some people a 1st round pick. So this is a situation you definitely need to pay a lot of attention to. We also see JD McKissic go up in ADP a little bit. I assume the reason for this was because Antonio Gibson's turf toe situation was murky at the time, but we actually just heard yesterday that Antonio Gibson, his turf toe is cleared up, apparently, according to Ron Rivera. And he also said himself that it's cleared up and he's ready to go. So hopefully that pushes JD McKissic's ADP a little bit down. Antonio Gibson, you guys know, is a big target of mine, a big target of Danny's on this channel. So when we look at the rest of the ADP risers, there's not too many guys that stand out. We see that Melvin Gordon is on the rise a little bit. It seems like people are starting to catch on to the fact that Javonte Williams still needs to earn this job. It's not necessarily going to be handed to him. Melvin Gordon's going to be involved. He's not a guy that I'm targeting in drafts, but I do think he's enough to make me nervous about Javonte Williams. That's basically what I think of the Denver Broncos backfield. And then when we look at the Jets backfield, again, we talked about them on the June ADP risers and fallers, but when we look at Michael Carter immediately getting this starting role, it sounds like he's going to be the 1A back in this offense. Kevin Coleman probably involved to a decent degree as well. This looks like it's going to be about a 50-50 split. Maybe it's 60-40 Carter. Connor Hughes has been pretty much all over this story. He knows that fantasy players are all over this Michael Carter situation. So he's been talking about it as if Michael Carter is the starter. Tevin Coleman's going to be involved. And then they're going to mix in some kind of rotation of Ty Johnson, LaMichael Pirine behind those guys. either way, it sounds like Michael Carter is the back to own. And the way I'm looking at Michael Carter this year in fantasy is that if we continue to hear things like this and we continue to see things like this once preseason games start to kick off, I think Michael Carter is going to be at least a mid RB2 in fantasy this year. And whether he's drafted that way or not, I think he belongs in the conversation with guys like Mike Davis and Myles Gaskin in that 5th round range. And he's currently going way later than that, right? He's like in the 7th, 8th round in drafts. So as of right now, he's a guy that I'm scooping up a lot of. Him and Trey Sermon both. They're guys that I'm scooping a lot of because I think by the time the end of the offseason gets here and we're almost at the season, they're going to be 5th round picks because we're going to see preseason games of them being used with the first team. And that's going to push their ADP up. So if you can get them at a discount right now on Underdog Drafts, I highly suggest you go do that because I don't think that discount's going to last very long. And then when we go to the running back fallers, not a whole lot of news relating to running backs lately other than the Cam Akers news, of course. But when we look at Leonard Fournette is actually the biggest faller in terms of running back ADP on Underdog. And to me, the reason is probably because people are starting to realize that they signed Gio Bernard. I talked about this last time. I did an ADP risers and fallers, but Ronald Jones and Leonard Fournette are going to split early down work. And I think Gio Bernard and Leonard Fournette are going to split 3rd down work. So we have a situation where both of the main roles from last year, like last year at the beginning of the season, Ronald Jones was the early down guy. Leonard Fournette was the 3rd down back because Shady McCoy was there and he didn't do anything. He was completely washed up. They used those two guys in tandem. But I think this year they sprinkled Gio Bernard in to split passing game work with Leonard Fournette because Leonard Fournette dropped a lot of passes last year. And on top of that, he wasn't good in pass protection. So if anybody's expecting Leonard Fournette to do what he did in the playoffs, I highly suggest you not to do that because in the playoffs, Ronald Jones was injured. Gio Bernard wasn't there. So Leonard Fournette, yes, if Ronald Jones is injured again and Gio Bernard is not there, he gets cut or something, then Leonard Fournette will probably have the same role he had in the playoffs. But as it stands right now, this is a backfield that I'm completely avoiding in standard redraft leagues. I will take the shot on Ronald Jones in best ball because I don't have to choose when to start him. But outside of best ball leagues, I highly suggest you just stay away from this backfield because it's going to be a complete headache to figure out who to start one week versus who to start the next. Obviously, if Leonard Fournette gets injured, Ronald Jones is going to have a lot of upside and vice versa. But that's the only real way that you're going to get some clarity on this backfield because I think Bruce Arians knows it's a committee, wants it to be a committee, and he kind of likes trolling fantasy players. And he talked about it on a podcast that I listened to that he doesn't really like fantasy football. And I think he's just doing it to spite us. So that's basically the Bucs backfield in a nutshell. We see Tariq Cohen on the fall as well. It sounds like he's still dealing with his ACL tear, some rehab complications similar to what we've seen with Saquon Barkley. So that's causing his ADP to go down. It's making me like David Montgomery more and more every day. So Montgomery right now, if you can get him in the 4th round of Underdog drafts, you're absolutely stealing because I think he's going to be an early 3rd round pick by the time drafts come along. And then when we look at a couple of these other guys, just some less notable names, we have Tevin Coleman on the fall. I just think Tevin Coleman stinks. Like Carter is running with the ones. Yeah, he's going to be involved, but what kind of value is he going to provide you if he's a 10 touchback on a presumably a bad offense and he's a bad player in general? So like what kind of upside are you getting there? Even if Carter got injured, I still don't really like Tevin Coleman for fantasy purposes. And then we see James Robinson on the fall. To me, we haven't really heard anything about James Robinson. It's really since last year because everything we've heard about James Robinson has been in comparison to Travis Etienne, right? When they drafted Travis Etienne, they're like, well, how does this affect James Robinson? And Urban Meyer was like, well, we're going to use all these guys. But we haven't heard anything like James Robinson's looking great in camp and he's like really shouldering the workload. All we've really heard is things about Travis Etienne and the fact that there was a report yesterday that he's uncoverable by linebackers and drills. It's like it's the Jacksonville Jaguars linebackers, so it doesn't shock me. But Travis Etienne, to me, is the running back to own in this backfield. He's the guy that's going to get the receiving work, which is the most important for this backfield because this is not an offense that I expect to score a lot and to be on the goal line a lot. So the fact that Travis Etienne and James Robinson are probably going to split goal line work doesn't really concern me that much because the receiving work is the important part because it's a bad defense. Bad team, they're going to be behind in games. So I want the running back who's on 3rd down. To me, that is the most important back on the team. And to me, that's Travis Etienne. I think he's clearly the 3rd down back on this team. And I also think he's going to outcarry James Robinson. I think a lot of people are putting way too much credence to the fact that James Robinson was good last year. This was a tanking team. They won 1 game. They used James Robinson because they didn't need to win. They used an undrafted free agent in a workhorse role because they didn't need to win. And on top of that, this is a new coaching staff. We've seen Doug Marrone who was the previous coach of the Jaguars, put anybody into a workhorse role. So there's a good chance that was just a coaching tendency. They're not going to use James Robinson or Travis Etienne in a workhorse role. They're going to use them in some kind of committee. If you want to avoid Travis Etienne, I understand. But to me, James Robinson, the fact that he's still being drafted somewhat high, like he's still the 98th overall pick. To me, there's no chance I would pick him anywhere between, before the 120, 140th pick, because I think all he is really is a backup running back for a bad team. So overall, he's a guy that I just don't really believe in. When we look at wide receiver risers, I'll try and speed these up a little bit, but we could see a lot more fallout from the Green Bay situation. Obviously, we see Randall Cobb go up the most spots in ADP because he is resurrected from the dead in Houston, and he goes over to Green Bay back with Aaron Rodgers. Marquez Callaway and Traquan Smith are also on the rise, obviously, as a result of the Michael Thomas injury, which I'll talk about in a second. To me, with this New Orleans Saints wide receiver core, to me, I just don't want anybody. I know the popular narrative that people are going to push are, well, somebody's got to catch the ball there. It's like the answer to that question is Alvin Kamara. He's the one who's going to catch the ball there. I don't care about anybody else. Traquan Smith, Marquez Callaway, to me, at best, what are you getting out of these guys? Boomer bust wide receiver threes. Like, that is the best case scenario for any of these guys. And to me, I think this is going to be a run-heavy offense. It's going to run through Alvin Kamara. It's going to run through Latavius Murray and Taysom Hill. I think that's the best case scenario for this New Orleans Saints offense. And on top of that, I don't really think this is going to be a very high-scoring team. I know we've traditionally seen the Saints, whenever there's injuries, they can figure it out and be a top 5 offense still, but I think this is going to hurt them a little bit more than we're giving them credit for. So as a result of the Green Bay situation as well, we see Allen Lazard on the rise. We also see Devontae Adams go from basically a mid-second round pick to an early first-round pick, and I think that is completely warranted. If you guys missed the YouTube short that I did when Aaron Rodgers returned to Green Bay, Devontae Adams is now my firm and solidified wide receiver 1. He is the only wide receiver that I would pick in the top 8 picks of overall in fantasy right now. And to me, he slots right into a conversation. If you're in any kind of PPR league, I wouldn't blame you for taking Devontae Adams over Derrick Henry. So if you're in the 4th, 5th, 6th overall range of your draft, if you know your draft position, I think that's about the range where you need to consider Devontae Adams. The way I treat Devontae Adams this year is the way we treated Antonio Brown for a number of years, right? He is that guy. He is the dude that is going to get 160 plus targets, 12 plus touchdowns every single year as long as Aaron Rodgers is there. So this is a dude, if you can get, and I pick 9th in my home league, if I can get Devontae Adams at 9 overall, I will pick him in 0.2 seconds because I think he's an absolute steal at that point in the draft. Okay, so a couple more camp hype guys. We're seeing some old dudes get some love in camp. We see Emmanuel Sanders and AJ Green. They're both getting some love in camp. How much credence am I putting towards it? This is my takeaway from it. If AJ Green is getting love in Arizona, it means that Rondale Moore is not going to be a thing his rookie year. That's basically my biggest takeaway. I don't put too much credence into AJ Green, specifically his own fantasy stock, but what I take away from it is that he's going to keep some of the young guys off the field. He's playing well enough that he's going to keep Rondale Moore on the bench. He's going to keep Christian Kirk on the bench. And the overlying theme of this is that we want Hopkins and nobody else on this Cardinals receiving core. And then Emmanuel Sanders, basically the same thing. He's going to keep Gabriel Davis on the bench. The reason they signed Emmanuel Sanders is probably because they didn't believe in Gabriel Davis to be a starter right away. We don't really know what's going on with Cole Beasley, but if Cole Beasley does in fact opt out of this season or whatever because of his own freaking crazy Twitter account, then we're looking at a situation that Emmanuel Sanders is probably going to be the wide receiver 2 for this team. And he'll probably be as valuable as Cole Beasley was last year. So Emmanuel Sanders, again, another guy that late in underdog drafts, I really like taking. I think he's a guy that I'm going to own a lot of in redraft too. I think he's a guy that you can probably flex if Cole Beasley is out. And even if Cole Beasley isn't there, I still think this is a guy that's going to have his weeks here and there. So we also have some young guy training camp buzz. Obviously, that's the time of the year that we're in. We're getting more training camp buzz about Elijah Moore. I'm not shocked at all. We're getting more training camp buzz about Rashad Bateman. Again, I'm not shocked at all. But we're also hearing a lot about Terrace Marshall potentially running the slot in Carolina. And this is something I expected to happen. I thought he would just take over for the Curtis Samuel role because he was the slot receiver at LSU when Justin Jefferson left. And that's exactly the role that it sounds like he's going to play for Carolina. And I think that's a great sign for him. He's a guy that I like taking late in drafts as well. I think he has some upside. I wouldn't say he has a lot of upside unless some of them, the Carolina receivers get injured. Because Christian McCaffrey is back, I'm not sure that we're going to see 3 of these receivers perform for fantasy last year, because we saw Curtis Samuel, Robbie Anderson, and DJ Moore all be fantasy viable last year, but Christian McCaffrey was injured. So With Christian McCaffrey back, I have a feeling it's going to be the CMC show, the DJ Moore show, and the Robbie Anderson show. I'm not sure if we're going to get enough weekly consistency out of Terrace Marshall unless something happens to any of those three guys. So that's my thoughts on him. Obviously, he's going to be a popular, sleeper candidate for a lot of people. When we look at some of the other guys, the other young guys that are performing and rising in ADP, we see Darnell Mooney is up in ADP 6.9 spots. I think the reason Darnell Mooney is up in ADP is because Anthony Miller was traded. And on top of that, the fantasy community is in love with Darnell Mooney, right? They really like this guy. I know he had a good rookie season, but let's not pretend like he's guaranteed to break out this year. I think he's a 5th round wide receiver. He's undersized. He had 97 targets last year, but he played for an offense that threw the ball at a top 10 rate. So his target share of the Bears' targets wasn't actually that high. I think this guy's bound to disappoint some people if they think and they're expecting a wide receiver 2 in fantasy. I think this is going to be a boomer bust wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4 type. He's going to have his weeks here and there, but I don't think this is a guy that we can rely on. So if you're, bullish on Darnell Mooney and you're going to take him in the 8th, 9th round of your fantasy draft, I'd encourage you to pump the brakes a little bit. So overall, when we look at some of these other guys too, we have Brandon Ayuk, Jerry Jeudy, Chase Claypool. All these guys are getting pumped up in camp. Again, I'm not shocked. They're all good players and they're all big time breakout candidates, in my opinion. As second-year wide receivers, we always want to be targeting young wide receivers. It's a big-time philosophy of mine. We talked about it last year. Once we get into some of our tips for redraft players, which we're going to be doing in the next couple of weeks, we're going to talk about second-year wide receivers. It's a big-time advantage that you can get in fantasy drafts because a lot of people are scared of the unknown. They were scared of it last year with guys like Terry McLaurin. They were scared of it last year with guys like DK Metcalf and AJ Brown. They were like, oh, are they going to get the targets? It's like, when you're a talented young receiver and you're getting open and you're catching the ball, your quarterback throws you the ball. Like that's just what happens in football. Anybody who's played football probably knows that. So these second-year wide receivers are going to be big time targets of ours come fantasy drafts. So wide receiver fallers, we see Denzel Mims. He's running with the 3s. Like I don't even know what this guy is at this point in his career. He's already being written off by his own team. So you should write him off basically in fantasy if that's the biggest takeaway from that. I wouldn't draft this guy. I wouldn't, trade for him in dynasty. He's not a buy low candidate by any stretch of the imagination. This is a guy that I'd be trying to get rid of if I have on my dynasty roster. If you can get any kind of rookie picks or young ascending players, then go out and get them for Denzel Mims. If you can throw him into a trade package and upgrade one of your other positions, go ahead and do that as well, because I think that's a great move. Michael Thomas, obviously on the fall, he is dealing with a injury that's going to keep him out for, probably at least the next 5-6 weeks of training camp and the preseason and probably into the regular season as well. If anybody is buying into Michael Thomas, he's currently still going off the board at 62 overall, which is a 5th, 6th round pick. So if you're going to take him that high, just be aware that this is probably not going to work. Like anytime we buy the injury dip and we take a guy like Michael Thomas coming into the season with the injury, it usually never goes as we want it to go. And especially considering we had concerns about Michael Thomas before this injury news. So overall, this is just a guy I'm completely avoiding in drafts. I don't think he's really worthy of that kind of draft capital. I think this has got to be a guy that we take in the double-digit rounds, given the fact that he's going to miss a number of weeks of the season. And when he comes back, we don't really know what he's going to be in terms of his involvement of the offense. We don't know who the quarterback's going to be. All that stuff kind of contributes to the fact that I'm just kind of out on Michael Thomas now. Unfortunately, I was in on him before he got injured, but yeah, this is a tough situation. We see some rookies struggling to get acclimated, plus some Aaron Rodgers fallout again. We have Kadarius Toney. I guess he was injured to start training camp. It sounds like he's back now, so we'll see how that goes. But it sounds like he's got an uphill battle to make the starting lineup because Sterling Shepard's an established slot receiver. It sounds like they don't really want him to go anywhere. He's basically competing with Darius Slayton. And then Kenny Galladay's dealing with a hamstring injury, so maybe that gets Kadarius Toney more reps with the ones. But either way, this is a first-round wide receiver that's already not off to that great of a start in terms of his NFL career. So he's a guy that I was avoiding anyway. So we got Amari Rodgers also on the downfall. Makes a lot of sense with with Randall Cobb coming in because he's the slot receiver. We expected Amari Rodgers to potentially work his way into the slot for Aaron Rodgers, but it doesn't look like that's going to be the case. We also have T.Y. Hilton and Paris Campbell. Again, fallout from the Carson Wentz injury. Not ideal for them. Cole Beasley's Twitter account's causing him to fall in ADP. And then Nico Collins, I'm really not sure why Nico Collins is on the fall right now. Maybe it's because of this Deshaun Watson situation, but like I said, Deshaun Watson was on the rise. So I'm not really sure why Nico Collins is on the fall. I've heard from Texans beat reporters that he looks really good. And the one thing I would say about Nico Collins is that his rookie season so far kind of does remind me of Terry McLaurin's because we all wrote off Terry McLaurin right away because he was on a terrible team, right? We were like, okay, so his quarterback's going to be Case Keenum or Dwayne Haskins. Like, we weren't excited about Terry McLaurin, but he tore up camp. And then in the preseason, he looked good as well. And then when we got to the actual regular season, immediately he performed right away because he had no target competition. And Nico Collins kind of is in the similar situation because Brandon Cooks is there, but I mean, there's a chance he gets traded. He's also an injury prone guy. So we'll have to see with that. But Nico Collins is a guy that if he's a very talented receiver, and it wouldn't shock me if he is and was just misused at Michigan because it's Michigan, but if he comes in right away and performs, and he could get on the field and he could be a fantasy producer. So he's one of my favorite dart throws, especially in underdog drafts. I consistently grab him in the 17th to 18th round of my underdog drafts because rookie wide receivers that are going that late with third round draft capital that have a lot of physical talent are worth that kind of gamble, in my opinion. So we'll speed through the tight ends real quick at the end of this, but we have Robert Tonyan as by far the biggest tight end riser. He's going off the board almost 15 spots higher than he was prior to Aaron Rodgers' return from his holdout. So to me, Robert Tonyan is the biggest beneficiary of the Aaron Rodgers, return to Green Bay, because Robert Tonyan was very efficient last year. Yeah, a lot of people are going to talk about the fact that, what he did wasn't sustainable and he had all these touchdowns on a low amount of targets, but Robert Tonyan's a young player. He's a 2018 undrafted free agent. The fact that he was that efficient probably points to the fact that he's going to get more volume this year. Yeah, he probably won't have 10 touchdowns on, 60 targets or whatever the hell he had this year. But if he gets 90 targets this year, he's going to still be a viable tight end one. And a guy that I think people are just writing off for no reason. I think they're just like, oh, can't do it again, not drafting him. There's a chance he gets more volume this year, especially if Green Bay becomes a little bit more of an efficient offense. Maybe they pass the ball a little bit more than they were last year too. And then we see some late round tight ends on the rise. We have Anthony Ferguson and Adam Troutman. Troutman, I suspect it's due to the Michael Thomas injury. A lot of people are expecting him to do a lot. I'm not holding my breath on Adam Troutman. He's a fine late round pick, but Anthony Ferguson, another guy that in terms of a late round dart throw, I think he's one of my favorite tight end threes. If I'm in underdog drafts and I need a third tight end, Anthony Ferguson, in my opinion, is going to have some big weeks here and there. We know he was used last year in the slot more than any other receiver in the league, pretty much, more than any other tight end in the league, not named Logan Thomas. So Anthony Ferguson is a guy that I find myself grabbing consistently late in drafts as a late round dart throw and a third tight end in best ball. So he's a guy that I would keep an eye on. He's probably going to be a streamer this year in fantasy for redraft purposes. And then tight end fallers. We see Zach Ertz and his blonde hair have effectively ruined Dallas Goedert's outlook, at least in the eyes of some fantasy players. So, I mean, Dallas Goedert's a guy that I think was going a little too high to begin with. So now he's probably going around the area he should be going, but it sounds like Zach Ertz might be there to stay in Philadelphia. And that's definitely going to put a damper on Dallas Goedert's potential breakout, because Dallas Goedert was a guy that we heard for years. It was like, oh, if anything happens to Zach Ertz, Dallas Goedert's a top 5 tight end. Well, Zach Ertz was suspected to be on the move. Doesn't sound like that's the case anymore. So it looks like Dallas Goedert might be back to being a committee tight end, and a good committee tight end at that, but his ceiling is definitely capped if Zach Ertz is there. Mike Gesicki on the fall as well. He's got on the COVID list, so that's probably why he's on the fall. Mo Alley Cox, again, probably fallout from the Carson Wentz injury. Jared Cook, another guy that I'm not sure why he's on the fall. Apparently he is on the fall, but I am not sure at all. So if you guys are doing drafts right now, go ahead and get Jared Cook, because he is currently, slated to take over the Hunter Henry role in the Los Angeles Chargers offense. And for a quarterback like Justin Herbert, that could result in a lot of touchdowns. And we've seen Jared Cook be very efficient on low target volume before. So he's a guy that I really like as a back end or a high end tight end 2 in my rankings currently, and a guy that I'm drafting pretty much everywhere in underdog drafts, because I think he's going criminally undervalued right now. He's going in like the tight end 21, tight end 22 range. And I have him like tight end 14 in my rankings. So I think he's a pretty good value. So if you guys did enjoy that, I hope you guys took away some nuggets from that. This is basically just to keep you updated on what's happening in camps. If you're not, maybe you don't have a Twitter account, you're not following the NFL very closely. So hopefully you guys did enjoy that. If you did, like, comment, subscribe. As always, if you want to support the channel in any way, go ahead and use some of this information that I talked about to go ahead and do your own Underdog Fantasy drafts. And if you don't have an Underdog Fantasy account, you can sign up using promo code FSE, and at first deposit, minimum of $10, you will get a $25 bonus on top of whatever you deposit. So if you put $10 down, you get $25 on top of that right into your account. You'll have $35 to go ahead and start doing drafts with. The Underdog Fantasy platform has just launched their Puppy 2 contest, which is basically a small version of Best Ball Mania. It's a $5 entry. You could win up to $100,000, I believe, if you come in first place. So a big time payout if you can, draft well and perform well. So, and as a thank you for using our promo code, you'll also get both of our draft guides for free. And again, if you have any league punishment ideas, comment them down below. I haven't set a real timetable for when I'm going to end that contest, but whenever we get a league punishment idea that we really like, we are going to, enact it into our league, and you guys are going to win a free listener league spot if you guys do in fact give us the best league punishment, and you'll also get a free draft guide on top of that as well, and then potentially a bonus prize that we haven't really decided yet. So hope you guys enjoyed that. Peace out and enjoy your Wednesday.
Why you need the money?